Is it a duck or a rabbit? I'm sure we've all seen that famous sketch. You know, it's been around since 1892. There are other puzzling images and drawings like it. Is it a goblet or two faces? Is it the young woman in the fantastic hat looking over her shoulder, or the old hag in the shawl? Is the dress blue and black or white and gold? Right? Remember that one? Who remembers that one? The blue dress or the... I don't know. I saw the blue dress, so I don't know what the rest of you guys saw, but... The Ambassadors is an oil painting that has puzzled viewers since 1533. When facing the painting head on, you see a big blob on the floor between two men. If you go to the side and look at it from an angle, you'll see the blob is a human skull. And historians believe it's meant to be what they call a memento mori, a reminder of your mortality, a reminder that you're going to die. Like many philosophers, the teacher of Ecclesiastes struggled with the elusive nature of human existence. You know, we long for eternity, and yet we are trapped in time. We have so much ability, ingenuity, strength, smarts, even genius, but are powerless against the regular courses of life. Is the human condition wonderful, or is it meaningless? These are questions that plague philosophers throughout human history. The teacher's description of the human experience has become a sort of duck-rabbit illusion to biblical scholars. Some look at what he writes here in chapter 3, and they say he's a total pessimist. Others say, oh, no, he's an optimist. Some say this chapter lays out the, quote, hopelessness of struggle against an arbitrary God. Yikes. But others see this text as a beautiful outworking of a merciful God's sovereign providence. And so which is it? What are we supposed to see when we look at human life? How can such different conclusions come from the same sketch? And as God's people, what does it mean to live a full life even when difficult, sorrowful, painful things happen? How do we respond to the wide spectrum of experience that all of us are going to go through as human beings? Well, let's take a look. Verse 1, there is an occasion for everything and a time for every activity under heaven. This begins the most famous section of Ecclesiastes, one of the most famous poems in all the Bible. But notice, this is important if you've been with us through any of the other studies, the teacher has changed his regular formula. He did not say every activity under the sun, but he said every activity under heaven. He generally means the same thing, human life lived on the earth, but it's a subtle but important difference. Because by the end of our text, we're going to see that your life is not just confined to under the sun. Your life is not just happening randomly. In fact, there is a God in heaven, the one true God, and we discover in this text that he is the one running the show. He is sovereignly administrating his master plan all over the earth, and specifically in your life. You are known by him. Your life he has plans for your life. He knows your days. He holds them in his hand. He has numbered every hair on your head. Or if you used to have hair, he numbered the hairs that you used to have on your head. As the teacher starts to tell us about this plan, this master plan from heaven, he describes it as appropriate here in my text. Perhaps your version has a different word. The word can also be translated as beautiful. It includes every activity, every occasion, every season and moment that a human being might experience. This isn't a list of things, a bucket list that we need to go out and achieve, right? And one of the mistakes of the famous song that has to do with this passage, that was taken by the Byrds out of this passage, is that, you know, at the end they tag that line on there that's not from the Bible. I swear it's not too late. And so it's kind of like, hey, take charge of your life and go out and do the thing that you should do. Choose peace instead of war, right? That was the idea. It was an anti-war song. That's okay. But that's not the point of the poem. The point of the poem is this is the human experience. These things are going to happen whether you want them to or not, right? No one really wants there to be war. No one really wants there to be death and sorrow, and yet they are part of the human experience. And what we learn is that every activity, every occasion, every moment you might experience is appropriate as far as heaven is concerned. Now, some of the things that follow in this list happen only once to you. Some happen in a regular cycle. Some are desirable. Some are very undesirable. Sometimes he starts with a positive first. Sometimes he starts with a negative first. Some are individual events. Some are communal events. But the idea is that they're all on your calendar in some way, shape, or form. They have been appointed to you by God on purpose. Verse 2, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot. In the Hebrew, scholars will tell you that the poem consists of 7 paired lines of very small syllable words. One commentator writes, the number 7 is pointedly chosen because of its traditional association with the sacred. And if you're a Bible student, you know that 7 is often the number that we say is of completion, of fullness. And so the idea is that God has sovereignly appointed a full and complete life experience for the people of earth. And the ideas that we're going to read here are straightforward. We don't want to dissect a poem too much. It's a poem after all. And I'm only going to make a comment or two about certain lines that I thought were helpful as I was studying about it. For example, uprooting here, your version may say to pluck up. It speaks of like clearing a field of unwanted plants so that you can then plant a desired crop. It doesn't just mean to walk by and yank a flower out of the ground. It's uprooting for a purpose. Now, some of these appointed moments we have agency in as individuals, right? You can kind of choose whether you're going to laugh or whether you're not going to laugh. But other things happen to us. You didn't get to choose the day of your birth. But no matter what happens, the teacher is suggesting that all of it has a purposeful place in God's plan. None of it escapes his notice or authority. Sometimes we just let life happen to us, but theologically speaking, life doesn't just happen to you. God is in charge of this entire universe. He is sovereign. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Verse 3 says, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. What about thou shalt not kill? Well, the commandment is thou shalt not murder. The teacher isn't condoning murder. He's referencing capital punishment or justifiable homicide and self-defense, maybe state-sponsored war here. That's what he's talking about. Verse 4, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. The first line refers more to activities you do individually, weeping and laughing. The second to things you generally do more in a group, mourning and dancing. God made us with emotions. He made us with the intention that we would group together in families and communities. God forbid that we allow ourselves to be part of a culture that refuses to laugh, refuses to cry when appropriate. One practical application I would say of this is that Christians should resist our current culture's drift into isolation. It's a thing that happened, pedal to the metal during COVID, right? The culture around us and the government around us and just the world at large said, go away, go home, isolate yourself, don't embrace people, don't be around people. You hear all these terrible stories of weddings that were canceled, people dying alone, funerals unable to happen. This isn't a comment about COVID-19 policies. It's just that we need to remind ourselves that as human beings, God created us to be communal, to be together as families, to be together as a spiritual family, to be together in communities where he has scattered us for his purposes. Verse 5 says, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. So in ancient warfare of the time, an army might come and not just fight you and not just kill you. They might also then cover your crop fields with stones so that you can't grow food anymore, so you can't supply your empire anymore. At other times, community might come together to gather stones so they could build a wall of defense or, raise a barn, something like that. That's the idea. And so the teacher is painting with very big strokes, life and death, personal relations, international relations, celebrations and sorrows. And next he turns even to economics. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to count as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Scholars kind of agree that he's talking about property. He's talking about engaging the marketplace. He's talking about the things you buy and the things you sell. Sometimes it's good to be frugal, and sometimes it's good to toss the trash and buy in some new lights so they don't do that anymore. No, I'm just kidding. But sometimes it's good to toss this is awesome. I love it. It's more engaging, right? A disco ball is going to drop down in a minute, and then we're going to really have a good time. So sometimes it's good to toss the trash, right, and buy a replacement. Sometimes we need to let go of something that we think is valuable, is treasure, but is actually going to weigh us down, right? That's embedded in this idea too. Think of a ship, a merchant ship that is caught in a storm, and what does it need to do? It probably needs to jettison its heavy cargo. Is it valuable? Yes, but that value or that weight is going to bring the ship to the bottom of the sea. And so in order to survive the storm, there's a time to let go of that valuable thing. Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak. In the ancient Jewish culture, most of you know, a person would often express great sorrow, especially at the loss of a loved one or a great defeat, by tearing the front of their garment. Eventually, the sting of that sorrow would subside over time, right? And though the loss may still linger and the hurt and the ache may still exist within the heart, it would be time to sow the tear. It's not like they had closets and closets full of clothes. And so that moment of saying, okay, I tore my clothes to show my loss and my sorrow and my pain. But now it's time to sew that tear back up and to carry forward. Not pretending like I don't have that sorrow, but just moving on. Verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Well, wait. Is it ever right to hate? Well, yeah, there are things that God hates, the Bible tells us. And we are to join him in that hatred. Now, we kind of are conditioned to think that, well, no, we just have to be nice all the time and everything is love all the time. But the truth is, God is upfront. He says, there's certain things that I hate. And we're to love what God loves and hate what God hates. In fact, Romans 12:9 says, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. And so the poem comes to a close. But unlike the Proverbs, did you notice we're not told what to do? It lays out all of these situations, all of these ideas, this wide spectrum, things that we look at, and many of you have experienced a lot of the things on that list already, and we all have the sneaking suspicion that we're going to experience the rest of them at some point, but no commands, no suggestions. You know, in the Proverbs, we are given detailed commands about how to act. Sometimes we read the Proverbs with the kids in the morning, and some of them, it just feels kind of silly. They're so detailed. They're so specific in some cases. You know, it talks about how to speak, when to speak, great. It also talks about the way you should eat a meal when you're in the presence of a king. Okay. You know, it talks about how to parent, what economic choices to make, how you should couple with others, on and on and on. Very specific application commands and principles given, says, hey, do this. But not here. No commands, no suggestions. You're just told this is the stuff of life and it's all going to happen to you at some point and you can't control it, and all of it has an appropriate place. You think, well, I'd like to skip a few of these appointments if you don't mind, but we can't. Now, after reciting this poem, the teacher responds with a rhetorical question in verse 9. What does the worker gain from his struggles? This is the thing he keeps just having such a hard time with. Remember, the teacher, who we know is King Solomon, but he's giving us the result of his decades of study of the human experience, the human existence, his search for the meaning of life. And we've seen already he's having such a hard time because no matter what avenue he searches, he can't find ultimate meaning. He can't find peace in his heart. He can't find lasting satisfaction. And it's because he has bypassed God largely in his experiments and in his understanding. And so here, as he's looking at life, if life is a painting, if life was a pencil sketch, he's looking at it and he keeps looking at it and he keeps looking at these different angles, and he says, you know, I see a lot of stuff in there, but what should be life, I keep seeing death. What should be great, I keep seeing the flip side, where it is defeat, where it is sorrow, where it is suffering. And so he says, man, what does a worker gain for all his struggles? He also lived in a time, man, do you know how hard it was to just be a person in ancient times? In every human generation before like 1950? You know how hard it was to do everything? How uncomfortable it was? You know how hard it was to get a new shirt? In every era. And so he's looking at this time, nobody has plumbing, nobody has refrigeration, nobody has, insulation that, in a modern sense, nobody has proper transportation, nobody has shoes for, as far as common people, there's no antibiotics, there's no real medicine, all these things. And he says, man, what is the point? What does the worker gain for all of his struggles? Where's the profit in being a human? Here's an example. A man might spend months and months clearing a plot of land of all the stones and all the weeds and every pebble on that field, hoping to plant crops so he can feed his family, only to then be drafted by his king into his army to fight in a battle where he, the man, is killed and the enemy army comes and covers his field with stones again. That's something that might actually happen to a person in Israel or a person in the Philistine country or a person around here. And in that case, isn't his whole life futile? That's the idea that the teacher's talking about. Now, the teacher hasn't used the term hevel, futile, in these verses, but that's what he means. That's what he's pointing out. It's the problem he can't escape. It's the reality that keeps gnawing at him. Now, the New Testament confirms what the teacher is feeling, the futility of the human experience. And we think, wait, isn't the teacher wrong? Life isn't futile. It depends on what you're looking at. It depends on your perspective, right? Because if you refuse to look through the lens of theology, biblical theology, if you refuse to use the mindset given to you by heaven, then yes, life is futile. You're not going to escape the futility of the human experience. Whether you're wealthy or not, whether you're successful or not, in the end, you're going to be trapped by that futility. And the New Testament confirms that. And it also confirms what the teacher is about to reveal in the next set of verses, that life is not random. God purposefully established the way of things. The things that the teacher is seeing here, God has established on purpose. Even what seems arbitrary is, in fact, part of his heavenly plan. Listen to Romans 8:20. For the creation, it's the world we live in under the sun, the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. And so God says, yes, I subjected this world and your experience within it, human beings, to futility. Hevel, that smoke that passes between your fingers and is sometimes noxious to you. Why did God subject the world to futility? Well, Paul's going to give us context in the verses surrounding Romans 8:20, but let's see what the teacher has to say first. Ecclesiastes 3:10. I have seen the task that God has given the children of Adam to keep them occupied. This is amazing. God, King of heaven and earth, outside of time and space in the way that we know it. God who could do anything he wants to do. You realize he can do anything he wants to do. He could just, if he wanted to, say, yeah, I'm just done. I'm done with the world. I'm done with humanity. I'm just going to clear that away and we'll try again another time. Or he could just say, I don't need angels. I don't need humans. I don't need creation. Just the Godhead can just hang out for eternity and that would be enough, right? But this is amazing. God occupies himself by keeping us occupied, right? It says, I've seen the task that God has given the children of Adam to keep them occupied. Well, why in the world does God involve himself in the affairs of us little people here on planet Earth? Well, the teacher, he likes to give us little hints from time to time, if you've noticed that. And he gives us a little revelatory hint here where he calls us the children of Adam. Ding, 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 ding. There's a lot of references to the first 3 chapters of Genesis in the book of Ecclesiastes, and obviously this is a big one. Hearing that name, that you are a son or daughter of Adam and Eve, that makes us stop and consider why things are the way they are, how we got where we are as human beings. Sorrow, suffering, death, decay, ruin, struggle, none of those things were supposed to be part of our experience here on the earth. We were supposed to have perfect harmony between us and our Creator. But what happened? Human beings wanted to be like God. They wanted to depose him from the throne and reign in his place. Say, well, I don't need to go God's way. I can be God myself. And so they made the decision to reject his word, to reject his plan. And what happened? They sinned. They brought sin into the world, and with it, all of the consequences and all of the bondage and all of the suffering and all of the death that we now deal with as a result. In response, God says, well, I'm going to do something very powerful. I'm going to do something very meaningful. I am now going to spend all of my time. Obviously, God is outside of time, but God says, no, I'm going to spend all of my time and all of my energy and all of my effort on trying to save you people from yourselves and from the consequences of your actions. Now, this is where different views on sovereignty diverge. Within evangelical Christianity, there are 2, 3, even more views on God's sovereignty. It's not an essential area, right? You can have a different view on sovereignty than we have here at Calvary and still be a Christian. Hopefully you think that we can have a different view on sovereignty than you do and think we're still Christians, but there are different views. There are some who say that God's sovereignty is absolutely deterministic, and what it means is that God not only is in charge of everything, he does everything. No rogue molecules is the bumper sticker slogan on there. And the idea is that everything that happens in the universe, God forces it to happen. It is him moving the pieces on the board. And if you extrapolate that out to its logical conclusion, you have a couple of very major and very scary problems. Number one, you can't escape the fact that then God is the author of evil if he has determined every single thing that has ever happened in human history. And number two, of course, the logical conclusion is that every person who dies and goes to hell was purposefully, sovereignly created by God for that reason, for that destiny. So that is one view on sovereignty. One of the problems with that point of view is that it does totally dismantle what we know about the character of God, the nature of God that is revealed in the Bible, right? So different scholars and different, systematic theologies and different veins of the church come to these conclusions, and they come to the Bible and they look and they say, well, here's what makes sense to us, and here's what we think, and here's this text. We really camp out on this text, but every systematic theology generates some questions, generates some problems. And sometimes when you're trying to work through an issue, you need to at least ask yourself, which problems do I want to live with, right? Because we're not going to be able to solve all of these issues intellectually. In fact, the teacher is going to say that. But just think about it this way. Centuries and centuries and centuries, genius Christians have been thinking through, studying, writing, debating, conversing about these issues, right? You and I'm not going to come to a conclusive answer on sovereignty that solves every problem, right? I just think it would be arrogant to say we're going to figure it out. These other people for hundreds and hundreds of years devoted their whole lives to theology and to studying the Bible in all of their original languages. They couldn't figure it out conclusively, but we'll figure it out, right? So the question is, what problems do you want to live with? And one of the problems with a deterministic view of sovereignty is that God's character and nature is now not what it is presented as in the Bible. God is presented as love. He is presented as merciful. He is presented as kind. He is presented as altogether good. And the problem is, if he has sovereignly determined every single action of every single molecule throughout every single moment of human history, then we have to redefine what love means, what good means, what kindness means, what mercy means. So that's an issue. Rather than God's sovereignty being a machine that even he is trapped in, right? We here at Calvary understand that God is sovereign even over his own sovereignty. Can we understand that altogether? No, but sometimes maybe family members or friends will say, well, if God doesn't determine every single activity, every single action, every single decision, every single movement on the earth, then he's not sovereign. I understand what they're saying, but now God himself is trapped in the machine of his own sovereignty, right? Instead, we believe that God is sovereign over his sovereignty, and that when the Bible reveals things about sovereignty, we can take them at face value. For example, that God has freed the wills of mankind to give us a genuine choice whether to accept salvation or reject it. It's called prevenient grace. That God, like he did with the angels, at one point gave them the option whether they were going to follow him or follow the devil, and they seemed to have a genuine choice. Adam and Eve seemed to have a genuine choice. The Bible certainly presents it that way. The second thing that the Bible reveals to us about the workings of God's sovereignty is that his sovereign providence seems to allow for flex in human time, flex in the accomplishments. How is that possible? I don't know. But here's what I know. I know he told Moses, you guys can go into the land right now. And the people said, we don't want to go into the land. And he said, I guess we'll wait 40 years now to go into the land. And so the question is, well, that offer, was the first offer not genuine? Was he just making it up because he was forcing them to refuse to do that? Or was there flex? One of the greatest verses about the flex of God's providence is found in the book of Esther. What does Mordecai say? Maybe you have been raised up for just such a time as this, but even if you don't do it, what will happen? Everything will fail? God's plan won't happen? He says, well, no, you'll be swept away, but God will raise up deliverance somewhere else. Now, God wanted Esther to do it. He put her in that place for that, we would say, right? Or at least that was her opportunity. But Mordecai's right. If she would have rejected God, and rejected the opportunity to save the Jewish people, God wouldn't have just let the Jews die. He would have raised up deliverance from someone else. What did Jesus say to the Jews? He said, isn't Elijah supposed to come first? And what did he say? He said, John the Baptist could have been Elijah, but you weren't willing. So he's not. And we're like, what does that even mean? Peter says in his second letter, did you know that you can hasten the coming of the day of the Lord? What? What does that mean? It means that there's flex in the providence of God and the work of God. And how do we understand of that? How can God be absolutely all-knowing and totally in charge, which he is, but also allow these sort of free will choices? We can't solve all of these problems, but what we can say is that he is sovereign over his sovereignty, and that the Bible presents him as not only allowing true relational interactivity between us and him, that's what he actually desires. That he wants us to actually choose to receive from him what he wants to give to us. We're not saving ourselves. We're not the ones that say, well, we loved God first. Absolutely not. He loved us first. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. We add nothing to God. We can't do anything to improve ourselves, but God offers salvation as a gift. And in order to receive a gift, you have to actually have a free choice whether you want to receive it or not. That's what we're talking about. Now, when Romans 8 spoke of creation being subjected to futility, echoing the sentiments of the teacher's writings, here's what else it said. Romans 8:19. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in the hope that the creation itself would also be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. So life is the way it is because God wants to adopt as many children as possible. And life, death, war, peace, weeping, laughing continues on and on while God brings his plan to fulfillment. His plan will be fulfilled because he is sovereign. He is in charge. He does what he promises. And so in sort of, American pop culture parlance, the man upstairs is the boss. That's what the teacher is saying. He is absolutely in charge. He is sovereign over all of the affairs of this universe. You are at the mercy of his divine will. The good news is that this God is merciful and allows you to make choices whether you want to interact with him or not. Verse 11, he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity in their hearts, but no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. Man, what a verse. We're going to have to break it down into three pieces. The first third, we learn that God not only has a specific timing, but that he makes all things beautiful in their time. Now, we cannot always understand the divine beauty of certain moments in life, moments of pain or sorrow or loss. But because God is so sovereign and so powerful, he is able to bring beauty from ashes. Here's one example from the New Testament. When Jesus' friend Lazarus died, he told his disciples that he was glad he wasn't there to heal Lazarus. He said, this is a good moment for you guys so that you might believe. Now, it wasn't a lovely thing that Lazarus died, and that is testified by the fact that Jesus went and wept, brokenhearted at the suffering of the family, at the suffering of Lazarus. But what followed was beautiful and timely and heavenly. And God accomplished a good plan through that unique life moment, right? Beauty from ashes. Does that mean that God causes all the suffering on earth? He is sovereign after all. Well, no. Romans says that sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, which then spread to all people. We brought death into the world. It is a consequence of sin. Today, God waits with his own long suffering so that more people have time to be saved. And as he waits, he works all things together for the good. He works with specific purpose. He invades the human experience in his effort to rescue us from the futility of a life dominated by sin. In the second part of verse 11, we read, God has put eternity in our hearts. We are hardwired to know there is more to life. We know that there is something beyond our galaxy, something beyond the grave, something supernatural that is calling out to us. But we have a problem, and that's the third part of verse 11. No one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. Right? So our view on sovereignty doesn't mean that a human being could figure out salvation on his own. No, he must have the revelation of God first. God must first do a work in his life to free his will and then send that person the gospel so that they have that choice to make. You can't discover the work God has done from beginning to end. Is this a cruel joke God is playing on us? Michael Eaton writes, we have capacity for eternal things, but the inward eternity has a negative result. Man has found nothing in the finite earthly realm which can satisfy our human hearts. What's God doing? Well, we were made to have full, unbroken communion with God himself. We see that in the opening passages of Genesis. But sin has ruined our understanding, ruined that relationship, and now as human beings, we are trapped in time, hounded by death, and our relationship with God has been broken. We can no longer comprehend his thoughts and his ways, not in full, even when we want to. Even when we're born again, what happens? We receive the mind of Christ, and we still don't understand all of his thoughts, all of his ways, everything that he's doing. We can't fully understand him. Paul said, right now, we see in part and know in part. Doesn't matter if you're an apostle, doesn't matter what, we see in part. And he says, but one day we're going to know everything. One day it's all going to be made right. We're going to be totally reconciled and glorified and in the presence of God. But that's why we still can't grasp all the things of God on this side of eternity. And so when we can't grasp certain theological things, when we say, how can God be sovereign but also man have a free will? Okay, well, that's when it's a good time to remember the character of God, the loving and merciful nature of God, the fact that he has shown us, listen, you might not understand everything, but let me tell you what kind of a person I am, the way I act toward people. And that helps us fill in the gaps we have in our understanding. Verse 12, I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and enjoy the good life. Well, what's the good life? In our last passage, the teacher told us to enjoy life. Now he qualifies it by saying, but enjoy the good life. The problem is, he's going to say in chapter 7 that there's no one righteous on the earth, no one who does good. Another truth echoed in Paul's letter to the Romans. The good life, according to the teacher and confirmed in the New Testament, is not the most comfortable life or the wealthiest life or the most exotic life. It's the life connected with God himself, surrendered to his will, understanding of his purposes. Paul explained to the Ephesians that our lives are not just tissue, are not just our experiences. He says, no, your life is God's masterpiece. It is his workmanship, and he created you in Christ Jesus for good works that you're meant to go discover and do. And so living the good life and enjoying it means walking with God with an active faith. That is the best life you could possibly have. a life that will be full of meaning and joy and satisfaction. Verse 13, it is also the gift of God whenever anyone eats and drinks and enjoys all his efforts. God not only has eternal purposes for you, he also wants your day-to-day to be full of real satisfaction, the lasting satisfaction that the teacher was unable to lay hold of himself. God doesn't consider the small, menial parts of your life unimportant. He wants every day that you live to be occupied by his joy. Of course, not every instance of life is desirable or pleasant from a physical perspective. There's going to be tearing, there's going to be sorrow, even death. But God's grace and his joy are always ours to experience because they are gifts that have already been given to you. You don't have to go buy grace. You don't have to go buy joy. God says, I have given it to you. My joy is your strength. It's already yours. It belongs to you. When you were saved, I didn't just give you a ticket to heaven. It was this whole comprehensive package, and we looked all at it in the letter to Ephesians a number of months ago, the comprehensive package of salvation, and it includes the already given gifts of grace and joy. Verse 14, I know that everything God does will last forever. There's no adding to it or taking from it. God works so that people will be in awe of him. Whatever is has already been, and whatever will be already is. Hold there. The next section actually goes, the next set of the verse goes with the rest of the chapter. But what we see here is God is working all over the earth to get your attention so that you can discover what he has done for you, how he loves you, the plans he's made for you, what he wants to do with your life. But when we try to live a human life outside of a personal relationship with God, we miss the whole point. The whole point of your life is to be God's workmanship, to be glorifying him, to be sanctified in him. And what's left then when we try to bypass God and go our own way is then the futility of existence resulting from sin. It's Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. Who wants to stay there? I don't, you don't, they didn't. God says, okay, well, you've broken this and now you're missing the point if you bypass me. And all that's left is the futility of human experience. If you try to live without a personal relationship with the God who gave you life and ordained your life and administrates your life, well, then you're going to only end up frustrated and aimless and unsatisfied. God works so that we will be in awe of him, so that we will fear him, is another translation of that. Walter Kaiser writes, the fear of God appears in Ecclesiastes at 7 crucial points. This fear is not an attitude of terror. It is instead a commitment of the total being to trust and believe this living God. God uses his sovereign power to draw you to himself so that you can discover that he is the author of your life. He is the savior of your soul. He is the answer to your longing. He is the giver of every good and perfect gift. He is the source of real living. He is the way, the truth, the life. He is the life. And you're not going to lay hold of what you're looking for apart from him. You can't get to the Father but through Christ. Fearing God changes everything. It supplies the necessary context. It gives us a framework so that we can not only appreciate the real value of things that happen to us, but also so that we can understand what the appropriate actions are for us to take as we respond to the times and seasons and moments of our lives. Right? Fearing God helps us to navigate all the stuff we read about in the first 8 verses. Is someone near me weeping? Well, because I fear God and go to his word, I know I should weep with them in compassion and support. Is it time for me to love or time for me to hate? Well, as I embrace God's word in my relationship with him, my priorities and my affections get ordered according to his principles. Right and wrong, profitable, unprofitable, it all becomes very clear to me because God has given me a lens through which to understand life. But it's not always cut and dry. Should I speak or be silent? Well, depends on the moment. Depends on what God wants. It depends on whether God is ordaining this in your life or that in your life at that moment. You know, you don't have to post every thought you have onto social media. I'm just throwing that out. Should I embrace or refrain from embracing? You know, those can be hard decisions to make. Let me give you a really plain example. We're over time, but that's okay. When I spent some time in the hospital a couple of years ago, I did not want to be embraced by any of you coming to visit me in the hospital. I just didn't. If you walked through the doors, I wouldn't have been built up and excited. I would have been like, oh, when is this going to be over? How long is this going to be? And I know that the absolute opposite is the true of some of you, I'm sure. Like, hey, I need people to come and visit me. Should I embrace or refrain from embracing? Well, as we walk with the Lord, he's able to reveal the good works he has for you. And those moments where he says, yeah, it's time for you to go and embrace that person. They are in need of it. Or no, refrain from embracing. They don't want that from you right now. Research shows that when people look at that duck-rabbit drawing, their immediate perception will change depending on what time of year it is. It's crazy. The same people. At one point of the year, they'll see the duck first, and at other points in the year, they'll see the rabbit first. And there are other mental factors that come into play. There are a lot of times when the teacher looked at life but saw death, right? The images around him were a memento mori, because he so often forgot to include God in his thoughts. He had the wrong perspective. In the pursuit of his life, he had turned his vision away from the Lord. But here we remember that God is the source of life. And when we remember God, we remember that he is the giver of life, that he gives it on purpose for a reason. And then all of our life experience comes into focus. Our daily lives become a memento Dei, right? A remembrance of God. And remembering that he has a sovereign plan that he's accomplishing. It's a beautiful plan that we have a part to play in. Our part is not arbitrary. It's not random. Your life is tailor-made for God's glory, for your satisfaction, and for the benefit of the people around you. The best life we can live is to play the part God has written for us. It's not always easy, but it is full of beauty and joy and dignity and purpose. As you face the moments ahead, remember your God in heaven who gave you your life on purpose, appointed your life with many moments, and intends to make a forever difference out of the times and seasons he brings to you.